breaking insight, so I'm back. Before we get to it, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, make sure you always watch full video.
Unbelievable ways convicts survived death row. Lethal injection, electric chair, hanging. Death sentences are terrifying, and for most convicts, they are the literal end of the road. Most, not all. Because there have been cases where convicts not only survived their death row sentences, they survived it in ways that you probably would only see in a Hollywood movie. And that's what I'm about to show you in this video. We're about to dive into 10 unbelievable ways convicts survived death row. Number 10. Rommel Broom. It's not right to wish death on anyone, but when Rommel was sentenced to death by lethal injection, many agreed it was a sentence he deserved. Born on the 4th of June 1956, Rommel had been committing crimes since he could spell the word. From petty theft to carjacking to aggravated robbery, Rommel would eventually enter new realms of vileness and depravity when he assaulted a 12-year-old girl that was babysitting his niece. Then, he committed the same heinous crime against another 14-year-old girl. However, this time, he went a little too far and killed her. Thankfully, the law caught up with him, and he was put on death row. His sentence was death by lethal injection. However, on the day he was to be executed, the strangest thing happened. The executioners couldn't find a vein to inject the lethal dose into him, so for the next 2 hours, they jabbed him with needle after needle. At one point, his lawyer stated that a doctor stabbed a needle directly into Rommel's bone as he sat, restrained to his chair, wiggling in excruciating pain. Eventually, they had to postpone the execution, and Rommel's lawyers tried to appeal his re-execution. His appeal was denied, but his re-execution date was delayed until 2022. Rommel Broom would die from COVID-19 complications in 2020, 2 years before his re-execution, in a way, cheating death once again, but this time by dying.
Nah, it was like, nah. He said, nah, you coming with me, my boy. Y'all don't talk about it. He was like, nah, you think you finna get away? Nah. Ain't no cheating me. You coming. Pause. Get yourself up out of here, bro.
Number 9. John Babacombe Lee. Two things can be true about a person, and in the late 19th century, John Babacombe Lee was no exception. On the one hand, John was a war veteran, having served in the British Royal Navy. On the other hand, he became a seasoned thief after retirement. Unfortunately for him, his choice of retirement would also cost him his life. In 1885, John Lee's employer was found dead, stabbed to death. John was the only man in the house, and he had a suspicious cut on his arm. And he already had a suspicious reputation. So, instead of a proper trial that many still believe would have found him not guilty of the crime, John was sent to the gallows. However, on the day of his execution, they tried to make John hang 3 times, and each of those 3 times, the trap door on the scaffold refused to open. Even after they checked it and tried it without him and it worked, the moment he was placed back on the gallows, it stopped working. Eventually, everyone present began to feel like they were participating in some mental torture experiment. The medical officer got tired and refused to continue, and John Lee's sentence was eventually commuted to a life sentence, and after years and years of appeals, he was eventually released in 1907. Number 8. Willie Francis. The story of Willie Francis is one of those stories that is bound to make your blood boil. Why? Well, because it happened in a time of racial injustice. Willie Francis was sentenced to death by electrocution for a crime he did not commit. In 1944, Andrew Thomas, a pharmacist in Louisiana, was shot and killed, and his murder remained unsolved for 9 months until Willie Francis was arrested in Texas for a different crime. According to the police, Willie was carrying the pharmacist's wallet in his pocket. However, the crucial evidence was not submitted during the trial that would follow. There were so many inconsistencies in the claims that the police made that by the time the trial was through, you could clearly see how racially motivated the whole thing was. Eventually, on the day of Willie's execution, he was sitting in the chair when all of a sudden he began screaming, "Take it off, let me breathe." It turned out that the electric chair had not been properly rigged because the guard in charge was drunk when he set it up. So instead of killing Willie, it was just sending volts of electricity through his body that fried him without taking his life. When Willie was eventually released, he tried to appeal for his freedom. Sadly, his appeal was rejected and was eventually re-electrocuted to death a year after, at the age of 17. Number 7. The man named Alireza. Why on earth would you try to smuggle crystal meth into Iran in the 21st century? That's the question you might probably want to ask an anonymous man we only know as Alireza, who was caught caught in the act I just described in October 2013. He was slated to be executed by hanging and was pronounced dead after 12 minutes of hanging. Then his body was taken to the morgue. The next day, Alireza's family was to collect his body for burial. However, a worker at the morgue noticed condensation on the plastic wrap around the condemned man. By some stroke of luck, Alireza was alive, and they immediately took him to a nearby hospital. However, Iranian authorities were not too happy with his survival, and they issued a statement ordering Alireza to be hanged again once he'd recovered. By their definition, they hadn't sentenced him to be hanged, they had sentenced him to death. This loophole became a subject of international debate, and after human rights fought against their verdict, they took a step back, and Iran's justice minister issued a statement that he would not be re-executed. Number 6. Anne Green. I don't know why death by hanging went out of style, but a good guess is that there were just too many people surviving it. One such person...
But then if you hang, shouldn't your neck be broken? Cause ain't that the reason why your life is ending, because your neck snapped? You should, even if you Israelite, you should be like this. Like, it should be over.
Was a lady called Anne Green, who in the 17th century was sentenced to the gallows for the most hypocritical reason. The 1600s wasn't a good time to be alive, and if you were a woman, well, then let's just say you had more points taken from you. What's worse, Anne Green had the misfortune of being a domestic servant during this time period. One day, she was impregnated by her master's grandson, and after the usual 9 months, the child was stillborn. When Anne tried and failed to hide the dead baby, she was convicted of infanticide and sentenced to death by hanging. And this is where things get really interesting. After she was violently hanged, the doctors still found a pulse and proceeded to pull out all the medieval stops possible, including giving her a tobacco smoke enema. She recovered fully, and the judge came to agree that her survival was a sign from God that she was innocent. I don't know about you, but I think it would have been nice if the sign came a little earlier. Anyway, Anne went on to have a happy life. She got married and settled down with her kids. She even kept her coffin as a souvenir. Number 5. Zoleka Kadkoda. Without laws...
I don't know if I can date somebody that went through that, bro. I don't know. Like, you have to be dreamed on right now, bro. Like, I swear, if it was her, yeah, no hesitation. But I don't know. Like, you was put to, like, your life was supposed to be ended. They went through with it, and you was still here. I don't know. Like, that'll kind of scare me, bro. That'll kind of like make me a little nervous. Like, I gotta watch you. Like, why you? All these billions of people, but you, why?
Society will collapse, and that's why they exist, to maintain order. With that established, there are some laws that just shouldn't exist. And in Iran, one of such laws caught up with a 20-year-old lady called Zoleka Kadkoda in 1997, when she was accused of adultery and sentenced to death by stoning. The process of stoning her is quite macabre. It requires the victim to be buried to their waist in the ground before being pelted with stones. However, halfway through the stoning, members of Zoleka's village stormed the scene and demanded that the stoning be stopped. At this point, Zoleka was no longer moving and was presumed dead. However, after she was taken to the morgue, she suddenly began to breathe again and was taken to the hospital. Zoleka survived. Over time, she made a full recovery, and an appeal for amnesty was submitted to the court on her behalf to give her a full pardon. Eventually, after international outcry, the Iranian authorities folded and informed Amnesty International that the death sentence against Zoleka Kadkoda had been lifted, and she was released on the 26th of November 1997. Number 4. William Duell. This is another case of a botched hanging that happened in 1740 to a 17-year-old named William Duell. He was convicted of being an accessory to the assault of Sarah Griffin in England and was sentenced to death. On the 24th of November 1740, he, along with 4 others, were hanged in Tyburn. And to show you that the executioner really meant business, William's body was left to hang for at least 20 minutes. At the time, hanged criminals were taken to an anatomy theater, where their bodies would be cut up and dissected for medical training. However, when William's supposedly dead body was stripped and laid bare on a cutting board, the student tasked with dissecting him noticed that the young man was still breathing, slowly. Within minutes, his breathing had gotten quicker, and 2 hours later, he was able to sit upright. William had survived. Later that night, he was sent back to prison, and the days that followed, they realized that the young man could not even remember being hanged. When the public got to hear of his case, they rallied behind him and protested for his freedom. Eventually, The authorities agreed, and instead of a death sentence, he was exiled to Boston, where he lived a full life, dying at the age of 85. Number 3.
That's
John
crazy,
Half-Hanged
bruh.
Smith. This is the last case of a botched hanging on this list, I promise. And it's also the most bizarre,
That's
because
crazy.
the convict, John Half-Hanged Smith, will probably make you believe in magic with how much he survived his execution. John was a veteran of the 15th and 16th century. He had served in the British Navy, but when he was discharged, he became a burglar, the kind you've probably heard of in Charles Dickens novels. By the 5th of December 1705, the long arm of the law caught up with John, and he was convicted with 2 cases of burglary and sentenced to death by hanging. Pretty harsh for the crime, but okay. However, John couldn't be bothered. He was so laid back, you would probably think he knew something no one else did. And he probably did, because when they hanged him, in front of everyone present, John's neck simply refused to break. For 25 minutes, John Smith was swaying, half alive, half dead, and in terrible pain. Some people tried to pull his legs to end his suffering. Eventually, the people who came to watch him die begged for him to be cut loose. And eventually, he was. John would later state that he preferred to stay hanging because cutting him down caused him much more pain. Some years later, John Smith was once again caught stealing and was once again brought before the law. But the jury got cold feet. Don't ask me how that happened. I'm equally confused. And the judge decided to set him free. Some months after this incident, John Smith was once again captured for theft and once again brought to trial. But a day before his trial, the prosecutor died, and once again, John was set free. It wasn't until 1727, when he was 66 years old, that the law finally grabbed him by the throat. However, instead of death, he was exiled to the state of Virginia, which at the time was the equivalent of death for a man his age. Number 2, Doyle Ham. If anyone ever told you that lethal injection is the most...
Just get out the country, dog. We're tired of you, man. You keep stealing. We can't get rid of you. Like, just go, man. Just leave us alone.
humane way to take a convict's life, show them the story of Doyle Ham. You could say that Doyle Ham was destined for his fate. He was born the 10th of 12 kids. 6 of his older siblings had spent time in jail before he could even walk, and his father was a hardened criminal. So it wasn't surprising that Doyle took the dangerous road of crime through his life. Unfortunately for him, a robbery gone wrong that led to the death of a clerk resulted in his own arrest when he was just 20. The year was 1987. Later that year, he was sentenced to death by electrocution in Oklahoma. But you know how these things go. Legal drama and appeals delayed his sentence until electrocution was no longer fashionable in Oklahoma. Lethal injection was adopted. But there was a problem. Doyle now had cancer, and his doctors told his executioners that it would be impossible to find a vein for the injection because of Doyle's medications. Unsurprisingly, the executioners didn't listen, and on execution day, an execution team struggled for nearly 3 hours, puncturing him at least 11 times in his legs, ankles, and groin, and apparently injuring several organs before giving up at 11:27 p.m. because the legal death warrant expired at midnight. It was torture, plain and simple. Luckily for Doyle, the cruelty of the act led to a sentence change. He was given life, literally, and he died at the age of 64 from complications of his cancer. Number 1. Wenceslao Mogul. The story of Wenceslao is as incredible as it is terrifying, and it happened during the Mexican Revolution of the early 1900s. Wenceslao was fighting in this war as a soldier when he was captured by the Mexican state and sentenced to death by firing squad without trial. Now, execution of this kind and at this time required 10 gunmen, 9 of which would shoot randomly at the convict's body, while the 10th would aim for a vital organ that would ensure the convict's death. When Wenceslao was shot, his 10th officer shot him in the head. There was no way he was supposed to survive it, and they thought he actually was dead, but he wasn't. Instead, through great pain, Wenceslao pretended to be dead, waited for his executioners to leave before crawling to a church 3 blocks away, where he was nursed back to health. The assault left him permanently disfigured, but he lived on for another 60 years before passing at the ripe old age of 85.
That's crazy, bro. Imagine they put you to get gunned down. 10 people. You get hit in the head and you still survive. God wasn't with you, bro. I don't know who was.